Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation about the fascinating documentary Coded Bias. My name is Wendy Mitchell. I'm a film journalist and film festival consultant, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator today. I wanted to mention from the outset that the film will be released at the Barbican's Virtual Cinema platform in the UK. It's available January 15th to February 12th. You can get more information about how to see the film at codedbias.com/virtual cinema. We have three very special guests with us today. First of all, of course, we have the film's director and producer, Shalini Kantayya. Welcome to Shalini. Thank you for making this film, a very important piece of work. And Shalini has previously directed the feature film Catching the Sun about solar power. So thanks for joining us, Shalini. We are really privileged also to have two of the interviewees, the subjects in the film. We have Silkie Carlo, who is director of Big Brother Watch, which is monitoring the trial use of facial recognition technology in the UK, being used by the UK police. And Silkie, prior to Big Brother Watch, was a senior advocacy officer at Liberty. She's also worked for Edward Snowden's Official Defense Fund and Whistleblowers at Risk. And she is the co-author of Information Security for Journalists. So welcome, Silkie. We also have, last but not least, Ravi Naik, who is the Law Society's 2018 Human Rights Lawyer of the Year. He is a multi-award winning partner with a groundbreaking practice at the forefront of data rights and technology. He's worked on the first case against Cambridge Analytica for political profiling, claims against Facebook for their data practices, many more. So we are so thrilled to have the three of you here today to talk about Coded Bias. Shalini, of course, I would love to start with you first. Just where did the germ of this idea come from? And, you know, this is a very cinematic film. So there's a way to do this that you could talk about these subjects on the news, but how did you know which subjects especially would work for a cinematic film?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Wendy, and just acknowledge that we're in a moment of turmoil and that so many fragile and precious democracies are sort of struggling right now. I'm speaking, of course, here in the US. And I just want to say what an honor it is to be on the panel here with incredibly renowned human rights activists, Silkie Carlo and Ravi Naik, whose groundbreaking work has set precedents for human rights, data rights law in the US, and what an honor it is to both feature their work in the film and to actually be in their presence today on the panel and the insights that they bring. It was a privilege for me. 2 years ago, I didn't know what an algorithm was. I had no idea. Everything that I knew about artificial intelligence was sort of from the mind of Steven Spielberg or Stanley Kubrick. And I didn't know what this was. A lot of my prior films that you've talked about have to do with disruptive technologies and whether they make the world more fair or less fair and for whom. And so I sort of stumbled upon the work of Joy Buolamwini, who's now featured in the film, and Cathy O'Neil, who's the author of a book called Weapons of Mass Destruction, and sort of stumbled down the rabbit hole of all of these incredible scholars and activists who have been sounding the alarm literally for years about the dark side of these technologies that we use every day. And I just want to say that what was so astounding to me was, you know, having no prior knowledge of how AI is really being used, is that I didn't understand when I set out to make the film the way in which humans are outsourcing our decision-making to machines. And already that AI is making such intimate decisions that govern human destiny, like who gets hired, who gets healthcare, who gets undue police scrutiny. And I think that realization came with this terrifying acknowledgement of research that was done by Joy Buolamwini and by Big Brother Watch UK, that these technologies have not been vetted for racial bias or for gender bias, or even vetted that they won't do undue harm, sometimes not even vetted by any standard of accuracy that we can all agree to. And so what I saw before me sort of in the making of this film was the fact that this is the place where civil rights and democracy, where the battles for civil rights and democracy will go down in the 21st century. And what I learned is that there is this educational gap where people don't understand the systems that we interact with every day, the information that we're served on Google. People just take that to believe like this is fact. This is actually like indisputable fact. It's like an encyclopedia, and it isn't. And I think in this making of this film, I began to question what Cathy O'Neil calls the blind faith in big data, and sort of began to look to people like Silke Carlo and Ravi Naik, who are leading the way towards more humane and ethical uses of the technologies that will really define what our societies look like in the future.
And I think it's so important that your film, you could have made a terrifying film about just what's going on in the US, but this is a global topic. So I'm just curious, you know, how you wanted to make it more global, and that it was important to you that it wasn't just US centric. You know, we've got your experts from some of the UK experts here. You also shot in China. So why was that important to tell a global story?
Well, I think that what I sought to do was tell a character-driven story, a cinematic story. I think that people respond to the film because they get to follow people like Joy and Cathy and Silke on a journey. And I always try to invest in characters that are on a journey to make change and sort of have high stakes in the matter. And we see the high stakes. For me, I'm definitely a global citizen. I sort of have grown up between cultures, and it tends to be the way I think. But also, when I started to explore data rights, I started to understand that there were these different approaches to data rights. And you see in the film this sort of Black Mirror episode inside of the documentary, which is the way China is using facial recognition combined with a social credit score, and the unfettered access that they have to people's data, and how that could be used with the authoritarian regime, you know, sort of in tandem. And sort of putting that against, you know, countries in the UK that have some data rights protection. As Ravi says, we're a civilized society. We have some data rights protections here, but yet don't have, that need to strengthen their protections. And seeing, you know, moments in the film where you see that line being crossed. You literally see the line being like, oh, this is the moment where civil rights is being impeded on by technology. And I think juxtaposing those two contexts to the United States, where we're living in a wild, wild west, where in spite of us being home to these companies like Google, like Facebook, like Amazon, that we literally have no data rights protections. And I think seeing those different approaches to data rights, to me, was really important for people to see.
And just for me as an audience member, that really helped me understand the big picture of all this. Silke, I would love to bring you in next, because there is such a powerful moment in the film when you're confronting the police in the UK about stopping a UK citizen. He's hiding his face when they're using facial recognition. And, you know, I'm an American. I've lived in the UK for 15 years. I was shocked watching this. And I was also shocked that I didn't know about this already. So I'm so glad that this film was made to tell us about this. Can you tell us more about, you know, that moment in the film? You know, does that represent the kind of work that Big Brother Watch is doing?
I think it's a really powerful moment in the film, because I think it's one that a lot of people can relate to. And you're seeing very ordinary person going about his business, who just has a kind of gut reaction to what the police are doing. Someone who, I mean, bearing in mind at this point in time, no one was really aware that police were using facial recognition. So here's someone who had never really thought about facial recognition before, wasn't aware that police were using it, and simply saw that there was signs saying facial recognition is in use, and just had a very instinctive reaction, a very kind of small act of resistance, if you like, to cover his face from scanned by the police. And I think the police reaction is quite telling as well, where they then follow him and particularly assaulted him, kind of grabbed him from behind, and ultimately fined him as well for swearing. And it's that kind of imbalance of power between the citizen and authorities that's so gut-wrenching to see, and I think is really exacerbated by technologies like these. And it's something that we've seen a lot we have observed police using facial recognition for a number of years when they were trialing it. I'm glad to say we're in a better place now, but we were seeing that this isn't only about how machine surveillance impacts on citizens and all of the wider social impact of that, but also how it further imbalances the relationship between citizens and the police, and it further emboldens police to treat people with more suspicion and act in a more authoritarian way, which, especially at a moment where in the West we are having a conversation about the relationship between police and citizens and what policing should look like, pertinent that we should think about how some of these new technologies that can fundamentally reshape society, they can fundamentally reshape policing as well, and it's sort of for us to grapple with that.
Yeah, thank you. And what is the status right now? Are police still trialing this in the UK, or has there been any sort of movement on this?
I think we're in a relatively good place, actually. I think the strength of the campaign against facial recognition has been huge. There has also been a successful case brought in Wales against the police use of facial recognition, because they hadn't properly considered the fact that technology is so well known to have problems misidentifying women and people of color, so there were very well documented issues with police use of facial recognition and accuracy. And we showed that through our information request, which is shown in the film, our investigation found that well over 90% of the police's matches are actually misidentifying innocent members of the public. Actually, facial recognition hasn't been used in the UK for almost a year now by the police, but we were also investigating use in the private sector, and we've tackled almost all of those, except just about a month ago, we found out that a supermarket chain has started using facial recognition. Now, to some degree, I mean, this actually raises a whole new set of concerns, because it's kind of like the birth of technology-enabled privatized policing. So you've got people who have not been given due process, people who are suspected, who are captured through CCTV, put into watch lists that they don't even know about, that they can't see, they can't challenge, and then they can be effectively blacklisted from a chain of supermarkets, a chain of shops and retailers in a whole area, despite the fact they haven't been convicted of anything. And the other thing is that actually some people will have spent convictions, but then will find themselves again kind of technologically blacklisted from society thanks to facial recognition. So that's something that we're actually publishing a campaign about today, and asking people, and already thousands of people have emailed it's the Co-op supermarkets to say that they won't shop there anymore and that they don't want this to be used.
Right, so that's the main campaign that you're running right now, is the Co-op using, against the Co-op using this facial recognition.
yeah, it's kind of like a whack-a-mole situation. But I mean, also bearing in mind that this technology could go anywhere, and I think that's why this film is so timely. You know, we in the midst of a pandemic where the British government has abandoned democratic norms and the rule of law. You've got China, which is practicing ethnic cleansing and, on some accounts, genocide. You've got the United States, where democracy is on fire. I mean, technologies like this, especially in times of emergency, in times of authoritarian landslides, can be used in ways that are despotic, that are that present a real challenge to people's human rights and to people's lives. And so, you know, we have grave concerns about the direction in which facial recognition could go, and the kind of uses that government might try to find for it. So we have to be extremely reactive and observant about that.
Yeah, thank you for being reactive. I think our society needs that. So Ravi, thanks for your patience. I'd like to come to you next. And another powerful moment in the film is you talking about rights around data and data being human rights, or being considered in that framework. Why do you think that's important?
Of course. I mean, there's a few elements to that. It's a really fantastic question. I'm really glad you asked it. Firstly, can I just say thank you to everyone being here. It's so amazing to be part of this fantastic panel with such great people and participants in the film and directors in the film and everyone involved in this film. It's so fantastic to be part of it. This question about data rights being human rights and to be considered through the human rights framework, I think, to me, is really important. It's not just something I think, it is enshrined in the legal framework in the European Union. The European Charter of Human Rights has a self-contained right to the protection of your personal data. And when I've started to think about this in a lot more detail as my career's progressed in this space, I think it's very easy to say to people, well, this is about privacy and trying to preserve your privacy. And I think that's actually the wrong dynamic to think about this. Human rights go beyond just privacy. As I say, the human rights framework establishes a right to data protection. When you start to think about what human rights are on their most basic terms, it's not about privacy. This is not just about your protection of data. This is about power. It's about allowing individuals to have a say as to how their information is used and how their information may be used against them. And you can extrapolate that same idea out to developing technology, the way that we have rights over how an entity has control over other human rights elements and over the way we live our lives. So facial recognition technology is a really good example of how you have to think about it through a panopticon of rights. You have to think you have a right over to how your data is used, but also it impacts on various other different rights. And the way technology is developing, it impacts on a whole host of human rights and human rights considerations. And being able to push back against the encroachment of that technology on the way our lives are led, and the social contract between us and the way we live our lives and those that control that technology is really important. The most powerful framework we have to control that technology and those developing use of technology in our lives is the human rights framework, because human rights are inalienable and they allow us to try to redress that power dynamic. And those that have power need to ensure that there is accountability over how they use that power.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that. And, you know, I think you talk in the film also about GDPR, which I think most people think of as a good thing, and it's giving us some protections. But is GDPR doing enough to protect UK citizens?
So again, a really good question. So there's a few things to consider here. Data protection is not a new design at all. It didn't come in from the GDPR. It's decades old, and it's a developing legal framework. And because it's developing, it's going to take a while for it to be fully felt. But really, I think, as opposed to a legal deficit, I think we have an enforcement deficit. I think on the one hand, you have those that are empowered to protect our rights, the supervisory authorities maybe being slower to act than maybe we would like. On the other hand, I think you have maybe a misunderstanding as to what data protection rights are. Individuals may be seeing it in their day-to-day work as maybe a compliance exercise, that I've ticked a box, I've done the GDPR compliance. But when you start to think about this as a human rights framework and to say, this allows me to have some control over the way big technology is influencing my life. When people start to realize that I think this film really demonstrates why we should be worried about, and hopefully will empower people to start to worry about that. That's when we'll see a sea change. That will be the watershed moment when people say these rights are real rights, and people start to stand behind those rights. Because unless people stand by their rights, rights are hollow. People have to say, this is my right and this is how it works, and I'm going to stand up for those rights. Now we're starting to see people standing up for those rights and what that will mean in practice. And I think that will lead to a sea change in the way technology is developed and deployed against us.
Great. Is it any special concern about data rights? I hate to use the B word, but I have to, Brexit. Is this going to have an impact on data rights in the UK?
It's a fantastic question. We are in the midst of Brexit. It's just, we're just here. We'll yet see what it means. We've been told by the government that we're going to have the same equivalence of the GDPR in our legal regime, but there are cause for concern. Our trade deals include the diminution of our rights. The potential trade deals with the US potentially will involve a diminution of our rights. It's very hard to see where we might go with Brexit in the future and what it might mean as a global country beyond the EU. I am concerned as to what it might mean as a standalone country. Our individual act that looks to protect our rights, the Data Protection Act, is not the same as what the GDPR requires. It's definitely less. We have a very intrusive surveillance regime, which probably doesn't allow for the full protection of data rights. I am worried about the consequence of Brexit because I think one of the main things that is seen as red tape that's consequential for the way we live our lives and what we do is the limits that data protection puts on what government can do with data. And fantastic organizations like Big Brother Watch are using those laws to stand up for all of our rights against the government. And films like Shalini's is really showing why those cases are really important. And I think the government might try to curtail those rights in their sea change towards a new future. That future might not be brighter. I'd say will be more impoverished if our data rights are diminished.
Wow. And Shalini, I think you've mentioned there is no framework in the UK in the US yet. Do we know if the lobbying is happening? Is the Biden administration, which I'm happy to say will be in power, do you have any indication that they might be interested in legislation about this?
Oh, yes, actually, I do think the new administration, I can say that there's an outtake from the film where Joy actually meets with now Vice President-elect Kamala Harris that never is on the cutting room floor of Coded Bias. So I know that this is something that the Vice President is definitely interested in, and that the government is starting to pay attention to. And not just government, but I think technology companies are now realizing what the full scope of what their unintended consequences could be. But I have to say that people always ask me, sort of, what is the future of data rights in the US? And I always say, we don't know. That's up to us. I just want to say, when people ask me if everyday people can make a difference, I would look at the work of Silkie Carlo and Big Brother Watch. The fact that she is now saying like, oh, this isn't a problem, that police are using this, is sort of a direct result of her dedication and her work on an issue that seemed like the inevitable future, which is the real-time use of facial recognition by law enforcement in the UK. And I think that her organization, which is observing police use of facial recognition, I want to say how brave and bold those actions were. That the moments that I capture of Big Brother Watch monitoring the police literally could not be captured in the US because we don't have the data rights protections that would allow that process to be transparent to us. So democracies are all over the world are grateful for this kind of work that is both monitoring how accurate this work is, monitoring how these systems get deployed. But the truth is that we need some laws in place. It's like what Silke was saying about this game of whack-a-mole, right? Like if we don't have some legislation that really gives us protections of human rights, and human rights being this idea that just by way of being human, we have inherent value. And how do we build systems of technology that actually acknowledge the inherent value of every human being? And I think what Ravi was saying, you know, I really didn't get, when I was making this film, the word privacy. I think there's something that I associate with property rights or something, and it seems sort of very in a galaxy far, far away from me. It seems like a nice to have. I think the word that rings true for me is invasive surveillance, and the ways in which communities are, and often communities of color, are disproportionately subjected to invasive surveillance. And like what Ravi was saying, I don't think I understood when I started to make this film the kinds of complete profiles that can be built about us based on our online presence. That there are AI models that can predict our sexual orientation. There are AI, and like Zainab says, it can be dangerous if it's right, and it can be dangerous if it's a little wrong, and both things happen. And so for me in the U.S., I'm hopeful about regulation, but I think I'm sober in that we all, what we've learned in the last year particularly, I hope, is that this is not the time to be asleep at the wheel as a citizen of a democracy, that we all need to be engaged. And if we can't take the kind of bold action that say Big Brother Watch is taking, or that Ravi is doing in their legal work, that we can all step out to support an organization like that is protecting our democracy in these ways. And so to me, it's the future is what we make it.
Well, yes, very true. For any of you, I'm wondering why isn't this on the front page of every newspaper? You know, why do you think the public is not more outraged about, you know, the way some of this technology is being used, about the biases in some of this technology? Is it because the public simply hasn't learned about this? They haven't watched this film yet to realize what's happening. I mean, do you think it's sort of an ignorance that people aren't more up in arms about this?
Well, just to chime in, what I will say is that I couldn't talk to people at parties for 2 years because I was too worried they would ask me what film I was making. It was so hard to communicate. I would sort of scratch my head and say, like, well, making a film about how robots can be racist and sexist and replicate human bias, and I would watch people's eyes glaze over. And I think what I hope this film will be is sort of an inconvenient truth for algorithmic justice, and help translate some of the issues. I think they're really hard to understand. And many of the grassroots activists that are featured in the film talk about how afraid they were to question these systems because there was such a big knowledge gap.
Yeah, Ravi, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question. I think on the one hand, I think I would say actually that maybe it is front page news at the moment. I think the power of Facebook and Twitter is now being put into very, very stark relief. And that's one really stark illustration of that power that these companies have that seems unaccountable and seems unchecked and resting in very few hands. But I think this also speaks to something wider, that actually technology is everything. Technology touches on so much of our lives. And because of that, we've had a dearth of language and a dearth of cultural understanding of what this technology and this developing technology and its ubiquity in our lives means. And that's why this film is so important, because it gives a language to the work we've been doing. It really frames the importance of the issues. And now we can say with certainty that these things matter, and this is why we can point to films and cultural events and show that the cultural sea change is not just cultural, but it's societal. That it takes laws, it takes regulations, it takes the arts, it takes politicians, it takes society to change the practices of this industry to make sure that this industry is not for a small amount of people, but for all of us to further our lives together collectively.
So, thank you, Ravi. And Silky, does it feel like the work that Big Brother Watch is doing is cutting through the noise and reaching people? Does it feel like more people are aware now?
I think so. I hope so. And I think I'm so grateful to Shalini for making this fantastic film, because it's going to really help with that. And also it really helps to give the global picture as well. And it's a call to action. It's, you know, the film doesn't just document what's happening. I think you can't help but come away from it and feel kind of activated and motivated to take action. And I think the other fantastic thing about it is, whereas we have had actually success with press coverage on this issue in the UK, but what I really like about the film and I think the way that the character stories are told is that it's more than just depicting the fears and the anxiety and the grave risks that we're facing as a result from this kind of technological change. I think it also shows the kind of dreams for the future. And I think one of the, you know, the reason that we're so worried about this is such a better future, a brighter one, and one in which there are more rights and in which we have more equality. And I think that's really important. I think, unfortunately, there are behind a lot of this technological development, you know, it's not just we're not just looking at editable product development, like you know, this kind of straight line of technological progress that makes us arrive at live facial recognition surveillance. There is a complete ideology embedded within it, and this kind of future view about a surveillance nightmare in which we live and in which few people have more power and profit. And I think kinds of ideas that are at play as well that we fundamentally reject. But yeah, I think there is more awareness now in the UK about facial recognition. And in fact, we have actually been headline news during the course of making this film. We on one day we were the top item on BBC News, which was just like mind-blowing. But what's even more blowing about it is that politicians still haven't taken action. So I think that's the problem, is the democratic chasm around this, that brand policy is far behind technology and far behind people's concerns and also desires about the kind of world in which we want to live with all of this technological advancement.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to follow up on one thing Silky said, that it actually seems like there's surprisingly a bigger shift in the US against facial recognition technology than there is here. There is bans and moratoriums and all sorts in different countries, which seems amazing, and a testament to the work Shalini and those my other guests in the films, or interviewees in the film, I should say.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just to chime in for people who might have missed it. I mean, we had a sea change that we never thought possible with the biggest multinationals in the world, IBM, Microsoft, and Amazon, all changing their policy towards their sale of facial recognition to law enforcement. In June of 2020, IBM said they were getting out of the facial recognition game. They would not research it, deploy it, anything with it. Microsoft said that they would stop sale of facial recognition to law enforcement. And Amazon said they would take a 1-year pause on its sale of facial recognition to law enforcement. And this was sea change that we never thought possible. If you told me in the making of this film that big tech, by their own volition, would stop sale of facial recognition to law enforcement, I would have never believed you. But that happened both because of the brave scientists in the film, people like Joy Buolamwini, Timnit Gebru, and Deborah Raji, who not only have on their side the scientific method, the power of having their results replicatable, that proving that facial recognition is racially biased. And them being the kind of scientists who would speak truth to power regardless of corporate interest, you know, who were that brave. And that came sort of in tandem with the largest movement for civil rights and equality that we've literally seen in 50 years, when peaceful protests took the streets of the US and all over the world for George Floyd. And I think what happened there is that engaged citizens started to make the connection between racially biased surveillance technology and the inherent value of Black life and the damage that these technologies, the disparate impact of these technologies to people of color. And so I think those things together really made me feel that we have a moonshot moment with ethics in big tech. That sort of sea change that we never expected made me feel like the cement is still wet in the technologies of the future, and we still have power to sort of encode our democratic ideals into these technologies, and that's what I hope we'll do.
I mean, Shalini, you mentioned equality being very important to this film and this topic. But it's also something I noticed as an audience member viewing the film. You know, usually films about technology, we see a lot of white guys talking as tech experts. And I found it so refreshing to see so many women, people of color. You know, how was that something that you knew you wanted to try to achieve, some sort of gender parity in your interviewees, or did that happen really organically as you were making the film?
Well, I have to say that I didn't realize what a revolutionary act it would be to just sort of feature or center the voices of women and people of color in the film. They're half the genius of the population. Women are not minorities. And my gender ratios are about the same as every tech movie you've seen. They've just switched. But I will say that I didn't set out to make a film that was predominantly about women or people of color, although I am a director who thinks really consciously about whose voices I elevate and as experts and thought leaders in the film. That is something that I do pay a lot of attention to as a director. But actually, it was the research itself that sort of kept bringing me back to all these brilliant and badass women and predominantly women of color. And I think it's because it's actually women, people of color, LGBTQ that have been leading the fight for ethics in technology for a long time. And now that the film, there was a moment in the making of the film where I sat back and I was like, oh, it's mostly women. Does that mean it's a woman's film? And I decided it wasn't. You know, we sit through so many technology films that are all male, but we don't say, oh, it's a male film. Right? It's just who they've sort of predominantly featured. And so what I'm sort of proud of is that I've now sort of leaned into it. And now I've had hundreds of conversations with people all over the world about artificial intelligence that are predominantly led by women and people of color. And that is something I am so proud of, because that in itself has recentered this conversation. And I hope it's something that the film will continue to do.
I think another great... Oh, sorry, Silky.
If I can just chime in, just one thing that I have reflected on about that. I mean, I have to say, first of all, watching it was so refreshing. And I almost hadn't clocked why watching it felt different until I just acknowledged that I'm watching really inspiring women. Kathy and Joy are like heroes to me, and it really feels different to watch. But also I've reflected on the fact that the way that division of labour has landed in terms of gender. I mean, I think it's really positive that women are leading charge for change. Also, what we're seeing is that we've got men who are making the tools and making the money, and women who are kind of doing this like domestic work of cleaning up the mess afterwards, and you know, trying to mop up problems that have been created by others. And I think that's a problem. I hope that part of what's happening around wider acknowledgement around rights are enabled by technologies is that law and ethics and visions for the future of humanity can be embedded at an earlier stage in product development, and we can find a way for that not to be too corporatized. Unfortunately, I think the story of Timnit doesn't necessarily bear out that it's going to go particularly well, which is a difference. I really, I think that's really important, because being in a situation where it's down to activists, and often grassroots activists, to be then in this kind of David and Goliath fight and trying to, after the horse bolted, bring back technologies that are very dangerous to communities. This is not a satisfactory position for us to be in.
I just want to add one thing to that. As a sci-fi sort of fan and fanatic, I learned that there was always this dialogue between science fiction filmmakers, science fiction writers and thinkers and dreamers, and the actual developers of AI. Marvin Minsky at MIT, who ran the AI lab, was one of the designers of HAL, Stanley Kubrick, Arthur C. Clarke's work of fiction. So I feel that it's what has happened, I think, with AI and with these technologies is a stunning lack of imagination about how these technologies can be used and deployed, because they've been created by such a small elite group of people. And what I hope Coded Bias does is sort of show that there is half the genius of the population that has been missing from the conversation. And it's my hope that that we will change the way we imagine AI, what AI can be in the future, that our collective imagination also changes.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because I was interested when Silky said before, the film is not just doom and gloom. I think I would love to hear from all of you. Obviously there are going to be benefits from AI that can help society. So are you hopeful for the future of some of these technologies, that they can help us rather than hurt us? Ravi, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think everyone involved in this space is very aware of the benefits, the great benefits that technology has brought to all of our lives. The fact that we're having this conversation over technology is just one example of the way we're all leading our lives. Sorry, but I think the thing that's important to put into this is that rights become part of innovation, not in the way of innovation, but that data protection, privacy, human rights respect becomes embedded in and by default as part of the design of technology. I think once we have that conversation, and once technology is created with a view to protecting rights by default, we'll all be in a much better place. Because I think the problem we have now, and it's really crystallized by this film, is the lack of accountability and oversight over how this technology is used, and the democratic involvement of the society that technology is impacting. And I think without films like this, we will not see that change. So I'm really pleased this film's out there. I'm really pleased to be part of it. And I'm really pleased that actually this conversation is changing in real time. It's a real societal moment that we should all be proud of, and all should want to be furthering.
Yeah. And Silky, are you hopeful for the future about some of these technologies and how they can be used?
I don't know whether to answer this honestly or optimistically. What I'm hopeful about is that there are activists and campaigners and lawyers and filmmakers like those who are involved with this and who are depicted in the film, and that what I'm hopeful about is that there is an imagination for a better future. Nothing's predetermined in life, and so we are where we are now on the precipice of the greatest change that I think human society has seen. I think even the Industrial Revolution. We don't know what tomorrow holds, but it's a way. We have to be vigilant. We have to be active, and this is a time of huge change. And I hope that the advocacy around this and the film itself will encourage people to have a view that there is this just kind of inevitable development of surveillance technology in this inevitable direction for the future. It's all to play for. Joy has shown that. The amazing campaign in America has shown that. And I hope that our campaign in the UK has shown that as well, that there is an opportunity for change and it's all to play for. And the more active we are, and I have to say, actually, even if it means just having a view and expressing view, but what the police always tell us and what politicians always tell us is people don't care. And that's an extremely depressing place to be in a democracy on the precipice of this huge change. And I don't believe that it's true. So I'm hopeful about the potential to have a brighter future, but I have to say the forces that we're up against are extraordinary and huge and extremely powerful. There's no financial interests in protecting human rights, and also because of all the states of exception that I mentioned, the pandemic, the democratic failures, and so on. It's really perilous, and so all the more reason for us to be kind of determined in shaping the future.
Great, and I think one thing that's so important about a film like this is that it doesn't just bombard you with facts and figures. I mean, you learn a lot, but it's a very entertaining watch. So Shalini, congratulations for making this film entertaining. You know, it's not a dirty word. And I'm just wondering, you know, obviously that was a bit about choosing the right characters, you know, who are your subjects, and it's going to be character driven. But can you talk just a little bit about the craft of the film? Because you've got sort of animation and graphics and just a real sense of pacing. And yeah, how did you make the film cinematic?
It was so challenging. I will say that. I think that, for one, I think this is one of the smartest group of human beings I've ever spoken to in my life. I think there's 7 PhDs in the film. And trying to get their lifetime research into like a 3-minute soundbite that you can sort of digest. And also to sort of connect that to why it matters. I think that the film both tries to disseminate science. I'm really proud of the science communication in the film, and it uses the language of science fiction, which is sort of my love and fascination and sort of the playground of ideas I like to play in the most is sort of this near future imagination, which AI sort of lends itself naturally. So you see me sort of pulling from traditional science fiction to create a visual language to understand AI in the now. And I think that the other thing that I'm proud of is that it just doesn't feature researchers and MIT data scientists, but it also features real life people who have been harmed by AI. A school teacher who was like best teacher of the year 10 years in a row. You literally can't be around this teacher without knowing that he is a person of great honor and an asset to students everywhere. Literally, he would move me to tears just by him talking about his commitment to his students. And he was arbitrarily rated by this algorithm as a bad teacher and spent years fighting it and ultimately won. And I think those kinds of stories, or Trenae Moran, who didn't know what biometric data was, never heard the word, but yet her landlord tried to sort of get it through as a way. Can you imagine having to subject yourself to facial recognition just to get into your building? And it wasn't happening to the same landlord's buildings in Manhattan. They were choosing a community in Brooklyn where they thought people would not fight for their rights. And not only did Trenae sort of organize her neighbors, but she also helped inspire the first legislation to protect other residents against invasive surveillance. And so to me, I feel like, the way of making it somatic was like giving that sci-fi language, but also showing these emotional stories of people that you really care about, and that emotionally move you. And you realize that This could be you. This could be any one of us who's, the predatory target of an algorithm, whether it be by unintended or nefarious intent. And so that I hope that it all, sort of moves us and inspires us. But I also think that this is an incredibly optimistic film. I will stand by that. People say, oh, it was terrifying, but it's also optimistic, because you can look at people like Silky and say, a handful of committed individuals in UK have literally rolled back real-time use of facial recognition and done our democracy all a great service. And that was done by a handful of people. And those same actions are being done on the local level all over the world, where people are going to their city councils, where you don't even have to show up anymore. You could just show up for a Zoom, 50 of your friends, and pass a new legislation. And so it is really my hope that the way in which the brave and bold and badass characters of my film sort of are my hope for the future. And I really hope that their stories will inspire audiences the way that they've inspired me.
Yeah, I think audiences already are inspired. I was curious to start to wrap up, just if people are inspired by watching this film, I think they will be, or more knowledgeable, and want to do something to make a difference, what can they do? Silky, how can people find out more about Big Brother Watch, or how do you hope people can get involved?
Yes, I hope people will have a look at our website. We have a whole campaign page on facial recognition. We have a facial recognition fund. We have campaign materials. We've just posted our leaflet about the co-op surveilling on people, so I hope those end up being distributed. Sign up to our email list or join us and follow work, because this is the practice of defending human rights is it requires eternal vigilance, and unfortunately, even though we've had a rollback this year, it won't go away. So, I hope that on those times where we were filming the observations we were doing, and we've done countless observations, spending like 10, 12 hours in freezing temperatures, just standing this all technology being used, it's like 3 or 4 of us. I hope next time it might be 10 or 15 or 20 or more people who will join us in protest against what happens. So yeah, there will be, unfortunately, I think, plenty more work to do on this going ahead.
And Ravi, for you, if people are feeling passionate, are there groups you recommend, or what can ordinary people do?
Of course, I think a basic message to take away from this film and the work that everyone here is involved in is that we have a choice. The way this technology is being deployed is by design. It's not inevitable. And I would really encourage people to take this opportunity to say, I have rights and I will stand by those rights. In January this year, we started my own law firm. It's called AWO. It's specifically to help and support protecting data rights and to further data rights. We're doing a lot of work in this space. So I ask people to look out for AWO and the work we're doing, but also really do support organizations like Big Brother Watch. These are the people that are actually standing up for our rights every day. Without the work that fantastic organizations like Silky's are doing, we wouldn't have rights to speak of. So it's really support the groups that are doing this, but also stand up for your own rights. Don't just take computer says no as an answer. Ask why. You've got a right to an explanation. Ask why your information is being collected. Start to understand how the internet operates. Surveillance technology, what is it? Try to opt out where you can. And I think Shalini said at the start of this panel discussion that education is really key to this, and people starting to have an opportunity to educate themselves, understanding the cost of technology and how they can really assess what they're giving away as part of that is really important. So I think coming back to that word, we have a choice. You have a right to say, to place your stake in society in the way you have a relationship with those that wield power over you. So stand by your rights, start to make that choice real.
Great advice. And Shalini, I know the codedbias.com website has more information. Is that right?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm so grateful to finally be able to share this with UK audiences through our UK virtual cinema premiere at Barbican Cinemas, where you can go to Barbican's website and literally support a local theater and the film and stream it from the safety of your home. So I'm so grateful to finally be able to share it in the UK. And, you know, I made this film because I hope it will raise education, and that in 75 minutes, it will change your worldview about how these technologies work. So I hope that you'll go to the Coded Bias website. You can host a screening through Women Make Movies. And Coded Bias has a Take Action page that profiles the great work and links to Silky's organizations and a whole coalition of partners doing great work in the field. And that's at the codedbias.com website. So thank you so much for hosting this incredible conversation.
Great. I think that gives everybody a lot to think about, but also some ways to take action and shape a positive future together, we hope. I wanted to thank you all Shalini, for making this film. Like I said, it's really opened my eyes, but it's also, you know, a very entertaining watch as well. Just a fascinating film with some fascinating people. I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you all tonight, to Shalini, to Ravi, to Silky. So I really want to thank you all for spending time with us, telling us more about the film and these topics. Yeah, we have a lot to digest, but I hope you all stay well, keep your data safe, and tell your friends about Coded Bias. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.